The Denver Nuggets lost to the San Antonio Spurs 121 to 120. I felt this game was a big deal for the Nuggets. This was a game where they had to win. They really had to win this game and their next game to guarantee that they would get the number one seed in the West. This loss is now costly for their season and playoff hopes, if I'm being honest here, because this loss now has caused them to fall all the way from number 1 to number 3 in the Western Conference, which is huge because if Denver finishes the season as a number 3 seed, they'll pretty much not have home court advantage after the first round for the rest of the Western playoffs if the seedings stay the way they are with the top seeds advancing in the second round, which will make it a lot more harder for Denver to get out of the West. Do I still believe that they will? Yes, I would say that they will most likely, but they have increased the path of difficulty to a much harder level than they had to put themselves through. This was very costly. Also, there's always the chance they can lose in the next rounds without home court advantage. That's why these losses were huge. I mean, this loss was huge. It reminds me of a situation that the Spurs were in way back in 2015. They were the defending champs. They had the number 2 seed, and then they ended up losing the final game of the regular season to the Pelicans, which caused them to fall all the way to number 6 because the Western Conference was that competitive back then. Still is today, but that one loss just ruined their season, caused them to go from number 2 to number 6, which resulted them into playing the Clippers in round 1. That resulted in them losing 7 games, a very tough series. But had the Spurs had won that game against the Pelicans, I do believe they would have won it all that year. I know people are going to say the Warriors, but the Warriors had inexperience at that time. Spurs, I think, had a great record against them that season. They had the experience. They still had enough of youth in them to beat the Warriors. So it changed everything. That's why you got to be careful about losing these games, especially if you have title hopes. You always want to have home court advantage for the whole entire playoffs if you can do it, or at least your conference. Denver has now just put themselves in a very difficult situation. Could they possibly still get the number 1 seed? Yes, it's very possible they could still get it. But now that really hinges on OKC and Timberwolves choking in their final regular season game. They have to hope that these teams lose, or at least one of them loses. I would say at least the Timberwolves lose because they don't have the tiebreaker with the OKC Thunder if they end up losing the next game. So it's kind of like they're put in a precarious situation now where they actually have to hope both of these teams lose. Yep, they have to hope both of them lose. If they win another game and both lose, and then get the number 1 seed back. So it hinges on that. And also a compromise scenario I would say is that if if Minnesota loses the next game, they could possibly take the number 2 seed, even if OKC wins the next game, as long as Minnesota loses the next game and they win. So it's complicated. But ultimately, they had control over their own fate, and they blew it tonight. They really blew it in that game, I feel, and they're going to pay the price. But one thing that stood out to me about that game was Aaron Gordon trying to start shit with Victor. Earlier in the game, he was trolling him. He was trying to punk him, and just it backfired. It massively backfired. I feel that really ignited Victor. They poked the bear by doing that. Just a dumb move by Aaron Gordon. I would think he would know better since he's a veteran at this point in time, but that was dumb. You never want to poke the bear, especially in a game where you must win. Granted, Spurs have been good, but you don't want to give a guy inspiration to play hard, and he gave it to Victor because at one point in time in the game, Spurs were losing by like 19 or 20 points, I believe, in the third quarter, and Victor went on that crazy run. So I think just what happened earlier in the game gave him that motivation. Just as a competitor, it fires you up. So that was really a dumb move by him, and I think it ended up costing them big time. Just not a smart veteran move by a guy who's supposed to be a veteran. That's one thing that stood out to me about this game. Just a tough loss, and if Denver ends up losing the playoffs due to not having home court advantage, they'll have this game to reflect on what could have been. So that shows you how important seeding is, how important it is. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this.